I'm Dave Chambers, pastor of Manistee Bible Church. We're going to be answering a question for you today, and I have with me Davey.
So I was talking to a friend the other day, and he asked me, if the Bible says everyone has sinned, then how do we know Jesus was perfect?
That's a very good question, because we know Jesus was a person. He was a real historical person that lived on the earth. And I can't imagine living 33 years without doing anything wrong. And that's what the Bible claims. That's what the Bible teaches, is that he did nothing wrong for 33 years. Didn't sin with thought, didn't sin in action, didn't sin in desires. He didn't sin when he was a weak old infant or when he was a toddler. He didn't sin when he was a teenager. He didn't sin when he was falsely accused and arrested and executed. The Bible says he never sinned. In fact, Hebrews chapter 4, it tells us that Jesus is our high priest who was in all points tempted like as we are, yet without sin. And we know he never sinned simply because the Bible says that he never sinned. And this is very important, because we think about Jesus and what Jesus did is Jesus died on the cross for our sin. And when he did that, for him to be able to die and to take my punishment and your punishment on the cross, he had to be innocent himself. If he was guilty, all he could do is die for his own sin. So he had to be innocent to be able to die for our sin. But the short answer is simply, we know Jesus didn't sin because the Bible tells us Jesus never sinned.
So how do we know the Bible's perfectly true then? How can we absolutely believe it?
That's a good question. That's a very long question to try to answer, but really there's a few things we can look at the Bible and we can see how it relates to other facts that we know, and we can see how the Bible relates to itself. So, for example, the Bible, in the Old Testament, it talks about a whole bunch of people groups. It doesn't just talk about Israelites. It talks about Egyptians and Babylonians. It talks about people most people have never heard of, like Amalekites. And we can look at all of these places and people groups that are described in the Bible, and we can go to archaeology and can study and look at archaeology and say, well, what the Bible describes is what archaeology is discovering and finding, this is what is real. Probably one of the biggest areas where I know the Bible is true is something called prophecy. Prophecy is when the Bible says this is going to happen before it ever happened. Something that 100 years or 300 years or sometimes thousands of years ahead of time, the Bible says this is going to happen. And there's one place in the Bible in Isaiah chapter 45 where God says to his anointed Cyrus, and he says that this man named Cyrus is going to restore the people of Israel. He is going to say to Jerusalem, thou shalt be built, and to the temple thy foundation shall be laid. So this man Cyrus, God says, is going to tell Jerusalem to be rebuilt and the temple to be rebuilt. Now that's important because Isaiah wrote 100 years before Cyrus ever came on the scene. So this will be like me saying in 2320, the President of the United States is going to be so-and-so. The Bible says it, Cyrus, and he's going to do these things. And we can go to the book of Ezra, and Cyrus was the king, and Cyrus did exactly what God said that he was going to do. And that's not the only example. There are literally hundreds of examples of the Bible saying ahead of time, this is what's going to happen. And it happens. Just one more quick example, Jesus. The Bible contains 300 specific prophecies about the birth and life and death of Jesus. Every one of them were fulfilled. I hope this has answered your question. Jesus was a perfect man, and we can trust the Bible when it tells us of who Jesus is and what Jesus did. We can trust the biblical record so that we know he was perfect. He did die on the cross for our sin, just like the Bible says.